Dangerous news, Justin Trudeau just appointed a Saudi-born extremist, Omar Alghabra, to be Parliamentary Secretary to the Foreign Minister. He's now in charge of Canadian consular affairs, our consulates around the world. With thousands of Syrian migrants flooding into Canada and the risk of Islamic terrorism at an all-time high, this is a recipe for disaster. You see, Omar Alghabra says that terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah are not actually terrorist groups. He doesn't think they should be illegal in Canada. He doesn't think Canadian journalists should even be able to call them terrorists. He even opposes having a Canadian no-fly list. Which is curious, because he himself was once stopped by U.S. agents when he wanted to fly to the States. And this guy is now in charge of Canadian consular affairs. He's the deputy, really, to the foreign minister. He's an official parliamentary secretary. Oh, but boy, does he hate Israel. He's pathological about it. He doesn't even think Canadian officials should visit Israel. He doesn't think Canadian officials should even participate in a Jewish charity walk in Toronto. He thinks Israel is, quote, cruel and brutal. Outrageous? Here, I'm going to give you the facts proving every assertion I've just made and more. Omar Alghabra was born in Saudi Arabia to Syrian parents, so basically the two most fascist, pro-terrorist places in the world. Now, it's possible that he couldn't wait to get out of there and come to Canada and embrace our values of liberty, equality of men and women, separation of mosque and state, things like that. But no. Once in Canada, he ran the Canadian Arab Federation, a group that is so anti-Semitic, it had its government funding cut off. They sued, but the courts ruled that, in fact, it was reasonable to call them anti-Semitic. Here, let me quote the Federal Court of Appeal. Quote, "There are mixed views about what constitutes anti-Semitism and whether the Federation's conduct could be perceived to be anti-Semitic. The federal court found the record was replete with articles and statements that supported the minister's characterization of the Federation." Yeah, you think? I said he doesn't think terrorist groups should be illegal. Here's proof. Here's Omar Alghabra's press release opposing the criminalization of terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. This is the man Justin Trudeau thinks will protect us. I said Alghabra doesn't think journalists should even be able to call terrorist groups terrorist groups. Here's proof of that. Here's his announcement declaring that he was taking a Canadian newspaper chain to the press council for the newspaper daring to add the word terrorist into wire stories to describe terrorists. Yeah, Alghabra isn't on Canada's side. A few years ago, Ontario police chiefs wanted to go to Israel to study counterterrorism from the people who do it every day. Omar Alghabra wanted to stop this. Seriously, here's what he wrote. "Sending the heads of Ontario police chiefs to benefit from Israeli security experience is like sending a Canadian parliamentarian delegation to learn from Saddam Hussein about democracy." What? He's equating the only Western liberal democracy in the region with a Muslim dictator and war criminal? That's bizarre. But the goal was the same: demonize Israel and stop our police from learning how to combat terrorism. But Alghabra didn't even like it when police went to a Jewish community event in Toronto called Walk with Israel. I've been to that one before. It's like a community party, a walk with a bit of a festival at the end, sort of like the St. Patrick's Day parade, but for Jews and people who like Israel, like a party in Little Italy, or like Chinese New Year. It's something that happens in Toronto. Omar Alghabra was against that. Here's what this little bigot wrote about that. He called this family march, quote, "a show of solidarity for a foreign state currently in the midst of an unresolved conflict, a country that is conducting a brutal and the longest contemporary military occupation in the world." So he wanted Toronto officials like the police chief to boycott the Jewish march. What a little anti-Semite. And he's now the junior foreign minister. Yeah, I feel safe. He loves calling Israel brutal while he defends Muslim terrorist groups. This isn't just stuff he said when he was the leader of the anti-Semitic Canadian Arab Federation way back when. I mean, just last year, when Israel finally struck back at the Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip, who had been raining rockets down on Israeli civilians, Alghabra wrote a Facebook post calling Israel, once again, blind and cruel. But not a word against the Hamas attacks on Israeli civilians that started it. In fact, when the arch-terrorist Yasser Arafat died, Omar Alghabra announced that he was in mourning. Seriously, he was grieving. Alghabra has been a senior organizer for Justin Trudeau. His job description was one line long: get every Muslim in Canada to vote for Trudeau. So anytime Trudeau went to a city, he would visit the mosque. Occasionally, he'd visit a synagogue or church too, but more frequently there was a mosque visit, almost always without media presence. No mosque was too extreme for him. He even went to the Wahhabi mosque in Montreal, the one funded by Saudi Arabia, fingered by the Pentagon as a recruiting mosque for terrorists. Here, listen to Trudeau boast about that.
I spend a lot of time running from the Bangladeshi to the Pakistani to the Maghrebian to the Asuna Wahhabi mosques. I cover all the different communities.
It's incredible what Alghabra got Trudeau to do, even to dress up like a medieval desert tribesman. Trudeau prayed a Muslim prayer called the Shahada, which under Sharia law is the requirement to convert to Islam. Now, I don't believe that Trudeau converted to Islam, but Alghabra knows what symbols to use, like this picture of Trudeau's mother and wife wearing hijabs. Well, the campaign worked, and Alghabra, after the election, was given his reward. And now Trudeau says he'll immediately withdraw our CF-18 jets from the Allied coalition against the Islamic State terrorists. And Trudeau says he'll repeal the law stripping Canadian citizenship from convicted terrorists who were dual citizens. And Trudeau says he's in favor of Muslim women wearing face-obscuring niqabs in citizenship courts. But what's next, now that Alghabra is a junior foreign minister himself? How will Syrian migrants to Canada be vetted? Will Alghabra's view that Hamas and Hezbollah aren't really terrorists, will that view govern how we vet Muslim migrants? What role will Alghabra have in making those decisions? After all, he's in charge of the consulates. How about our relations with Muslim extremist countries? Here's what Alghabra told Al Jazeera before the election. He said, quote, "On the issue of Iran, Trudeau has clearly stated that he is for engagement. He's also criticized Harper's government policy as being unhelpful in the Middle East and said that it ceases to be useful." Is Alghabra pressuring Trudeau to renew diplomatic relations with Iran, to cool relations with Israel? How about creeping Sharia law here in Canada? In an Arabic interview, Alghabra once said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, the majority of Muslims remained silent during the research of this law and abandoned the field to a dissenting minority of Muslims, which had a louder voice. As a result, this plan ended in failure. The problem was not a stand taken by non-Muslims against Muslims, but it was we Muslims who were divided among ourselves and disunited in our ranks." Omar Alghabra wanted Sharia law. What other advice is Alghabra giving to Trudeau about Sharia law, about anything? Omar Alghabra is not a Muslim moderate. He is a Muslim supremacist who hates Israel, opposes anti-terrorism work done by our police, and even tries to censor Canadian journalists. He says it's unfortunate Sharia law isn't in effect here. When Justin Trudeau promised real change, I'm not sure this is what most Canadians thought he meant. If you're concerned about Omar Alghabra being in charge of Canadian government policy, and if you're worried it will mean tens of thousands of other Muslim supremacists, radicals, coming into Canada in the name of being refugees, sign our petition at refugeepause.ca. Canada has already taken in more than 500,000 Muslim migrants in the past 10 years. How about we just take a pause for a bit while we integrate them and teach them that, unlike Omar Alghabra, real Canadians aren't apologists for terrorists.